Today we are looking at the topic of dragons. Now, of all the figures that we've been looking at in the Bible, today's thing that we're looking at is the most evil of all of them. It's more evil than the Egyptian magicians. It is more evil than the giants. It's actually even more evil than the demons that we talked about a few weeks ago with Jesus dealing with the demons. The monster that we're talking about today is the dragon that shows up in the book of Revelation, particularly chapter 12. Now, to give a little bit of a historical context of where this even comes from, the island Delos is not far from the island of Patmos. You can see on the map there where these two islands are. And Patmos is the island that John, who wrote the book of Revelation, was exiled to. Most of Jesus' followers were persecuted and killed for their faith. And John was the one disciple that wasn't killed for his faith, but he also was persecuted and he was exiled. So he went off to this island in Patmos. And here on Patmos is where he ended up writing this book of Revelation. Now, the reason that I point out where Delos is because interesting in the background of all of this is that Delos was an island that was sacred to the Greeks, because they believed that it was on Delos that Apollo escaped with his mother, Leto, from a great serpent by the name of Python, and escaped the island to get away from this serpent. But after their escape, Apollo came back eventually to return and defeat this great dragon serpent. Well, the outline of this plot is very similar to the outline of the plot of Scripture. The stories of dying and rising gods are popular in mythology. And it is these stories and these mystery religions that were very prominent around the time that the book of Revelation was written. But John takes these mythologies, John takes these stories, the narratives that people were used to, and the narratives that a lot of people oriented their life around, and he connects it with the story of Jesus. C.S. Lewis in his writings notes all of this as well, and he refers to the gospel story of Jesus as the true myth. It's the myth that actually happened in time and space and history, where all these other myths were just simply stories. It's almost like God wrote his story, or people intuitively knew this story within their mythology that then became fulfilled in Jesus. So Revelation begins with a woman in labor. Now, of all the sermons that we have been doing in this series, I'm going to warn you right now, today's is going to be the most complicated. Because if anybody has tried to read the book of Revelation, you know it's a very complicated book. And so there's a lot of decoding going on and a lot of importance of understanding the historical background to it. And so we're going to be doing that today. I'll try to help you as much as possible, but we're going to try to understand the dragon in the book of Revelation by trying to decode what's going on. Revelation is a different book from the other books in the New Testament. The other books are much more logical. They're either the life and story of Jesus, or they're letters that Paul is writing to the different churches to deal with different issues in their churches. They're the book of Acts, which is the early history of the church. But Revelation is like a really bad nightmare that is all of these weird visions and monsters and ideas that are floating around that John's now writing down, and they all have meaning, a lot of it rooted in the Old Testament, to tell the story of Jesus. So what we have in Revelation chapter 12 is a woman about to give birth. Now, she's no ordinary woman. She's one that is clothed with the sun, she's clothed with the moon under her feet, and she has a crown of 12 stars on her head. So see, right away, I'm telling you there, that's just not like what normally you see. These are all these visions on top of visions and trying to decode all of this. But this woman is about to give birth, and as she's about to give birth, we see in the vision a 7-headed dragon. with crowns and a 10-horned red dragon waiting to kill the child the moment that he is born. But this child is born, and as soon as he's born, he's snatched up to God and to his throne. And the woman then flees into the desert where God has prepared a place for her and for her protection. War then follows, and the dragon is defeated. That's the short snapshot of the beginning of this chapter. Now, in the traditional story, in regards to not the biblical one, but the understanding of the people of the day, in the traditional Roman myth, the woman is the Roman goddess Roma. And in that story, her son is the emperor. And the son kills the dragon, which in the mythology and in the understanding of the day, the dragon is the barbarians, all the people that are non-Romans. And these Roman emperors with their armies, they conquer and defeat all of the Roman enemies and bring in the Roman Golden Age. But John is rewriting the myths, and he is rewriting Rome's story as well. This is also why a lot of people say that John wrote in such a way, that this is a very subversive book. It's a book that has a lot of messages that really, and he's in exile as well, are anti-Rome. And so he's writing in this kind of way that's a bit more obtuse so that those who get it, but it's not so obvious that basically anybody can read it and realize that he is talking about the overthrow of Rome by a true king. And so what he does is he takes this Roman myth and retells it by a recognizable story for the Christians. And he changes it and says, you Christians, you people live by a different story. You don't live by the story that Rome is our hope, that Rome is the one that's going to defeat our enemies, that Rome is the one that we trust in. In many ways, we can understand this story today too. Don't we today also sometimes put our hope in armies, governments, America, or whoever? And this story is the same in Revelation, that is not where the Christian hope is. That is not where the true enemies get defeated. And so what John says in all of these pictures is that the woman is God's people. In the Old Testament, the people of Israel. And through Israel comes the woman's offspring, the Messiah. Ultimately, he comes through Mary, as we see even in the picture. So the dragon that we are talking about, the dragon here is not, in John's telling of it, the barbarians and the enemies of Rome. The dragon that we are talking about, the one that's more evil than the giants and the demons and all of these other figures, the one that's known in Scripture, here as the dragon. Many other places in Scripture, he is seen as the great serpent. Right in the beginning, we see him as a serpent, is known as the devil. So what John is writing and what John is rewriting is that the Roman myth is not going to save you. It's the biblical story that's the true story. He's blending this cosmic story with several historical stories and saying now the real victory has come. Because even in the Old Testament, we have already the playing out of this story. Think about as the dragon stands by the woman waiting to kill her child. Think back to the time of Moses. Back in the time of Moses, Pharaoh began to be threatened by God's people as they were increasing. And so Pharaoh put out a decree that whenever a male baby was born to the people of Israel, the midwives and the people of Egypt were to immediately kill it, destroy it. Pharaoh here is playing the role of the dragon. He is playing the role of the dragon, trying to snuff out the offspring of God's people. We also think of Herod in the New Testament. When Jesus was born and the wise men come, and the wise men talk about the star that they saw, and Herod begins to realize that, oh, there's some king that is to be born, Some king that may threaten my throne. What does Herod do? Herod puts out a decree to make sure that all the kids 2 years and under are killed, snuffed out. Once again, we have Herod now playing the role of the dragon. Satan, from all time, continuing through these figures like Pharaoh or like Herod or other people, is trying to stop the offspring of the people of God, the Messiah, from coming. And God continues to intervene and save his people. Now, it's interesting in the story, what happens in the Revelation story is God saves the woman by sending her out into the desert. Well, again, look at the biblical stories. In the Exodus story, God saves his people by they go out into the wilderness. In the Herod story, God saves Mary and Joseph and Jesus by sending them off to Egypt. When the devil comes, the ancient serpent from Genesis chapter 3, trying to tempt humanity into sin, to destroy humanity, what happens is, as a result, Adam and Eve, in a sense, also go out into the desert by leaving the Garden of Eden. So we see all these overlapping pictures of Satan trying to thwart God's plan of Messiah. But God continually intervening and protecting his people and preserving them so that he could bring about his victory plan for all of creation. So Satan works alongside of the Pharaohs and the Herods. And he continues in this day, even post-Messiah, to continue to work through these evil powers and empires. Just as John is also writing this as a bit of an insurrection message to the Roman emperors, we see throughout history that Satan continues to try to work through people like the Stalins and the Hitlers, the Genghis Khan, Osama bin Ladens. Many could argue today, even Putin. That Satan continues to work through these ungodly rulers around the world to try to destroy humanity. The dragon controls these people. He controls the principalities and the powers of things in this world like materialism and genocide and human trafficking. The dragon in the book of Revelation and in Scripture is the very incarnation of evil. That's why with all the different creatures and monsters we've been looking at and studying, this is the one who's the most evil of all. He's the very incarnation of evil. That's what John is depicting here with this dragon with all of its heads. But this section also challenges our fear. As evil as this being is and everything that he represents, what John is saying here is that we see Satan thrown from heaven and defeated. After the woman's son was born, he's snatched up to God and his throne, which is a reference to Christ's ascension, his resurrection, and from there, Christ now rules. He's ruling now, and he is going to bring his full rulership into being when he comes back. We have sort of the last throes of Satan now, post-resurrection and ascension. It's almost like what the kid said, how is Eve going to get that snake off of her legs that are all kind of wrapped up there? The snake has been stomped on. Jesus defeated the devil on the cross and the resurrection. But if you've ever seen something like that get stomped on, it still tends to twitch a little bit. I grew up on and worked on a farm a lot of summers, and we chopped the heads off of chickens. And you chop the head off a chicken, and the body kind of just flaps around for a little bit longer until it finally dies. That's a little bit like the lifespan now of the devil. He is stomped on. He is defeated, and yet he's still thrashing around in those last little throws and causing as much havoc as he can until Christ comes back again in his second coming, and it is completely done for. So this whole thing is what's depicted. John says, and he says that he hears in a loud voice, "It has come at last, salvation and power in the kingdom of God and the authority of his Christ. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters has been thrown down to the earth, the one who accuses them before God day and night. There's a whole interesting sort of history of trying to understand the role of Satan and where he is, and we don't have time to get into that, but it almost appears that prior to this, even in Old Testament times, we have in the story of Job, Satan in the heavenly realm, almost in a council with God, and Satan's job was to constantly accuse us. He's sitting there in the book of Job, and he's telling God, oh, look at Job. Job's not really a sincere believer in you. He's only following you because he's wealthy. He's only following you because he's healthy. He's only accusing. And that's what the devil does. But it seems here that now, after Jesus' resurrection and his ascension into the heavens, it says now Satan has been thrown out of heaven. He's no longer there in the ear of God, constantly accusing us. The one who accuses them before God day and night, that's what he was doing, has been thrown away. You now, as a believer, stand before God, and what God constantly hears about you is what Jesus says about you. And that is, that's my forgiven. He's forgiven. She's forgiven. She's one of our followers. Satan has been defeated. He's no longer accusing us before God. We have the Holy Spirit given to us, as Ephesians says, as a downposit, as a stamp upon us. We're approved by God because the dragon has been defeated. Revelation says they have defeated him, the dragon, by the blood of the Lamb and by their testimony. They did not love their lives so much that they were afraid to die. See, many of these first believers died for their faith. Therefore, rejoice, O heavens, and you who live in the heavens, rejoice. But terror will come on earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you in great anger, knowing that he has little time left. Now, this is one of these questions of theodicy, trying to understand evil, that we're never going to fully understand. You kind of wonder, why did God, so death, resurrection of Jesus, his ascension, Satan's defeated and thrown out of heaven, why didn't God just finish him off? Instead, what it says is that he was like thrown out of heaven and he was thrown to the earth, and it's like he's now doing all of that thrashing around like the chicken with the head cut off or the snake thrashing around. He's now been thrown to the earth and he's doing his last thrashing around here on earth. And we are the ones living in the midst of that. And it does make you wonder sometimes, why? What was the point of that? I mean, why allow that thrashing to go along on earth? Terror will come on the earth and the sea because Satan's been thrown out of heaven and the devil has now come down in great anger and he's thrashing around knowing that he has little time left. That's the time that we live in right now. And God in his sovereignty knows that even in the midst of allowing that to happen, somehow this works things towards his plan. But what's interesting also in the story, and the comical side, some people might be like, there's comedy in the book of Revelation? Well, there kind of is, because part of the comedy is it says that Satan was defeated by the blood of the Lamb, by Christ's sacrificial life. What appeared to be a defeat for the Messiah, one of the kids asked, why do we have that hanging up there? Which is a really ridiculous thing. We've become so accustomed to it. But that, 2,000 years ago, was what you would walk down the streets in certain parts and see littered along the streets with people hanging on them groaning for life. It's like the electric chair, except worse because it took forever for you to die. Why would people start very early on, take this brutal symbol? I mean, could you imagine if all of a sudden churches just started hanging electric chairs on their wall behind where the pastor spoke? People would ask, why would you do that? Do you know what that symbolizes? Do you know? Obviously, something must have happened in the electric chair to cause people to do such a ridiculous thing. And that's the question that people would have been asking too. The most brutal symbol in Rome is now a symbol that Christians prop up. Why? Because victory came through that. Now, the comedy aspect of all of this is maybe a little bit like this analogy. So Green Bay Bible Camp, summer camp of our denomination that's in Kelowna, they play this campfire game that's very similar to rock, paper, scissors. They call it Guerrilla Wars. And in Guerrilla Wars, instead of it being rock, paper, scissors, it's gun, gorilla, man. And they play this song, and then when they get to a certain point, you have to pose either as a man or a gorilla or a gun. And then how it works is that the gun beats the gorilla, and the gorilla beats the man, and the man beats the gun. And so whatever you are, or if you tie, you die. So if you do the same thing, you're both out. So they do this a bunch of rounds until they get down to like one person, and then they have a Guerrilla War t-shirt that you win. So you do the song, and then you go 1, 2, 3, and you become the gorilla or whatever you become, and you see who wins. It's like rock, paper, scissors. Now what's interesting about this is in God's version of this game, in the book of Revelation, he turns all of our expectations upside down. See, if I were to ask all the kids that were here, and now that they're not here, I can ask you parents, except you already know the answer. But if you didn't know the answer, and I were to ask the kids, and I say, okay, guys, we're going to invent a game, and there's going to be 2 characters in the game. There's going to be a dragon, and there's going to be a lamb. Now, they're going to fight. Who do you think's going to win? Now, obviously, if we didn't know all of our Christian Bible, answers, Jesus all the time, everybody would say the dragon wins, right? I mean, come on. But in the book of Revelation, the comedy here is that if we were creating the game in a biblical way, it would be lamb beats dragon. So I made sure I picked a picture of a lamb sticking his tongue out at the dragon. Because in God's story, lamb beats dragon. But it actually gets even funnier. Because what John writes here, in the ultimate mockery of all of the devil's strength and power, is he says the blood of the lamb beats the dragon. So it's actually not lamb beats dragon, it's dead lamb beats dragon. Now figure that one out. The dead lamb beats the dragon. It's what Paul discovered about the way that God works. 2 Corinthians, my power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to even boast in my weakness. God beats the dragon of the devil through a dead lamb. Not only is this true on a cosmic level, but this is an in-your-face to Rome. Rome, who represented all the might, all the power, all of that in that day, these weak, persecuted Christians who came predominantly out of the slave class and the lower class and the uneducated and the poor, and were persecuted on and off for the first 300 years of the church. Here we are 2,000 years later, and it is the largest faith in the world. Rome has fallen. Lamb beat dragon. That's God's story. That's God's economy. God promised that through the woman a child would come to crush the devil's head. It's why the dragon continued to defeat right at the birth point where these male children were coming through Pharaoh or Herod or other ones. It's why Satan was right there trying to snatch it up, but God intervened. With Satan's defeat and fall, however, comes a warning to the earth. And so as much as we live in this victory, and you've heard me say this before, as Christians, we do live in a tension of what many call the already not yet. Already this has happened. On a cosmic level, already this has happened, and in some ways God's outside of time, and so it is finished, as Jesus could say on the cross. On the other hand, we still are within time, and we still are operating through time, and we recognize, as what it here says in Revelation, that Satan is angry and still thrashing around. So we already acknowledge victory has happened, but we not yet realize that we still live in a world where there's a lot of destruction, with Satan thrashing around with his last gasps. And so we read that the dragon spews water like a river. It's a picture there of his evil deeds. As Justin Trudeau would say, he speaks moist. He spews, and his spewing is his evil deeds. Trying to take over the woman, that is God's people. He's spewing all of this evil, trying to destroy God's people. But the devil can't defeat her. The devil can't defeat God's people, and so he becomes enraged. If the church cannot be defeated, it says the dragon can at least hurt her children. And so the dragon makes war with believers, those who obey God's commandment, those who hold the testimony of Jesus. That's who the dragon is attacking. And so we see the dragon standing on the shore of the sea. And remember, we've talked about this before, the sea being the picture of evil. So it's not that he's standing literally in the ocean, but he's standing in the presence of evil. It's the symbol of evil. Later in the book of Revelation, when God finalizes it all, we see that there's no more sea. Evil's been defeated. And so here stands the dragon wanting to attack God's people. At this point, the dragon calls upon, in this chapter we continue to read, calls upon two allies to help him in his attack against God's people. Two others who you could say make up an unholy trinity, the dragon and these two others. The first ally comes from the sea, remember, symbol of evil, and is a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns with 10 crowns on each horn. Sometimes artists try to depict these in different ways. He has the parts of a leopard, a bear, of a lion. A lot of these have even historical representations. It's sometimes can look a little bit absurd when you try to draw it all out literally. But what it's saying here is that dragon gives this beast power, gives this beast throne, gives this beast authority. But what we notice is that one of the beast's heads is wounded. We also find that the world worships this beast, with the exception of God's people, whose name is written in the Lamb's book of life. Out of this beast's mouth comes proud words that blaspheme God, and this beast continues to attack the saints of every tribe, nation, people, language who refuse to worship him. Now, I have to give you a bit of a historical background for you to understand what this is saying for the people that would have first read this. For John's readers, this would have been fairly obvious, his Christian readers, of the subversive message that was speaking against Rome. Because what this beast represents is the Roman emperors. There were 7 Roman emperors from the time of Caesar Augustus to the time that the book of Revelation was written, which is then represented by a 7-headed beast. 7 is also the number of perfection, and so here, ironically, it's the perfection of evil. Now, why from Caesar Augustus is because Caesar Augustus was the first emperor to accept for himself the title of deity. Caesar is Lord, was the creed of Rome. And you, as a Roman citizen, had to pay homage to Caesar as Lord. You essentially had to acknowledge that he is God incarnate. That is something that Jews and Christians refuse to do. It's partly why the persecution of Christians happened. They were seen not only ironically as atheists. Get that. Our early Christian brothers and sisters were seen as atheists because we refused to say that Caesar was a god. And we were also seen as anarchists because we refused to pledge loyalty to Rome. Although Christians always said, we'll pray for the emperor, we will obey the emperor in all areas where the emperor is standing up for righteousness and justice and things, but we will not acknowledge the emperor as God. We don't believe that he is God. These are the blasphemous words that came out of the beast, the blasphemous words that came out of the emperor. I'm God. Caesar is God. You need to worship me as God. It became an imperial decree. The beast wanted worship. And yet the believers refused, causing the dragon to make war against God's people. Now, in John's day, we also have the wounded head. What's that all about? Well, in John's day, there was a story about one of the most notorious emperors around. And his name was Nero. Nero is famous for starting Rome on fire and blaming it on the Christians. giving him an excuse to persecute the Christians. Nero is so famous, we even have a software program called Nero for burning things because of his burning. I think the icon even has a little like flames burning, I don't remember. But anyway, this is what Nero was famous for. He was notorious. Both Christians and non-Christians, interestingly, danced and celebrated when Nero finally died. Much to his chagrin, he actually knew this was going to happen. He knew he was hated. He put an imperial decree that when he died, a whole bunch of the children in the empire were supposed to be killed on the day of his death because he didn't want anybody celebrating. After he died, nobody listened to it, and they just had a big celebration anyway. Nero was known for roaming the streets at night with other youth, murdering, raping, stealing, vandalizing at random. He had very promiscuous homosexual lifestyle as a pedophile with young boys. He killed his own mother. When he got on the throne, he erected statues of himself as the god Apollo. He was, as I said, accused of burning Rome and blaming it on the Christians. Nero was the first emperor to persecute Christians, often by drowning, burning. Sometimes he would tie them up in animal skins and set them up on poles and light them on fire because he was mocking the Christian idea of being a light to the world. He says, you want to be a light to the world? I'll light you on fire, and you can be a light to the world. Nero was a horrible enemy, not only of Rome, but he was a horrible enemy of the Christians. Nero's reign ended in 68 AD when he committed suicide by stabbing himself in the neck, again bringing jubilation through Rome. Now, he became the incarnation of evil. Between the 30 years of Nero's death and the writing of Revelation, however, a kind of legend grew up that made a lot of people afraid. And that is that there was a legend that this Nero, who killed himself, was going to either come back for the dead, or he didn't really die. He was like Elvis, and he was still alive, and it didn't totally finish off the job. So maybe for those that are Harry Potter fans, he was like nearly headless Nick, and his head was sort of half flapping on and off all the time. But the legend was that either he didn't actually die, or that he was coming back to life again, and he was going to take over the throne again. And there was so much fear about this. And so the beast that had the wounded head was the idea of the Nero myth, of Nero being the one who was going to come back. But we see the beast destroyed. All of these images in the beast from the sea confirm in the mind of early Christians that Rome and all of her leaders were nothing but puppets of the dragon. All of these different Roman emperors, the seven that claimed deity for themselves, all of these things, this was not just political on a human level, it was that, but underneath and behind it all, it was satanic. Just like today, I would argue that some of the things that we see of some political leaders is beyond just human, it's satanic. And what the book of Revelation is trying to show is these are satanic puppets of the dragon. But there's another ally to the dragon. Another beast, this one comes from the earth with 2 lamb horns and the voice of a dragon. This is the emperor's PR guy, sales representative of the first beast. He's the one that encourages the people of Rome to worship the beast. And he did this by performing signs and wonders to deceive the people. Remember in our sermon with the magicians. And this is why the New Testament talks very strongly about you can't use signs and wonders to identify whether or not a man or a woman is a man or woman of God. If somebody were to come up here on stage and I were able to lay hands on them and just heal them miraculously, that does not prove that I'm necessarily from God or not. The Bible always says that it's character, love, joy, peace, patience, it's character that identifies who are God's people, not signs and wonders. Sometimes God's people do signs and wonders, but they're not an indication of it. And we see here, like we saw with the magicians of Pharaoh, Moses did certain signs, the magicians of Pharaoh duplicated them. And what Revelation is saying here is that the PR guy of the Roman emperors is going to even perform certain signs and wonders that's going to deceive people to make them think these really are gods. And he's saying, don't be deceived just by the signs and wonders. And then we're introduced to that infamous number of the beast, 666, in this chapter here. The number of perfection being 7, this number 6 is the symbol of that which is less than perfection. 6 3 times means imperfection to the power of 3. Imperfection. Now, the other thing we have to remember here is sometimes we get into all these kind of conspiracy theories of 666. It's in your barcodes on your MasterCard, or you're going to get it stamped on your forehead sometime as a tattoo, and I mean all these things like that, which can really sell books and be great for televangelists. But in the actual historical context of all of this, Hebrew letters had numerical values. So it would be like in the English, the letter A would also stand for number 1. The letter B would also stand for number 2. They use letters is interchangeable for numbers and also for letters. So in the Greek version of the name Nero Caesar, when it's transliterated into the Hebrew, it adds up to 666. So this was a coded way when it was talking about 666, and that without having the number you cannot buy. It's basically saying that unless you pledge allegiance to Nero as God, you are going to be severely persecuted. It's a coded way of talking about this beast is none other than Nero himself. Another picture of the wounded, healed head on the beast. His message is a message that, John's message here is a message again of treason against Rome. So he wrote it in this coded language. The dragon, however, and his hosts have been defeated, and yet they're on a massive final assault on God's people. This happened in the 1st century. And there's a lot of information that you had here. Like I said, it's the most complicated sermon in this whole series because of all this Revelation stuff. And you have to understand the historical context of it. But it's not just saying that this happened in the 1st century. It's irrelevant for us. The message of the constant warfare between God with his people and the powers of evil continues throughout the ages of the church. Always mistakenly understood by the church when it thought about it in a very physical way. Let's raise an army and send crusaders out to slaughter people. That's never what the scripture teaches in the New Testament, ever. That's a complete misunderstanding of it. But it's talking about this at a cosmic level. Because remember, it wasn't God winning through people wearing armor and crusaders. It was God winning through a dead lamb defeating these political powers. Jesus' cross and resurrection. And God's people living that out. Often off radar, off grid, in little ways in their communities of subversive ways against the principalities and powers. And it's a challenge for us today. How do we need to live? I mean, we're not talking about let's be Hutterites or let's become monastic monks somewhere in that. But how do we live in a way that we just don't buy into everything that our culture says we need? The materialism, the greed, the sexual promiscuity, and the ideologies. And how do we as Christians live in that way that is countercultural? That says we don't live for the puppets of the devil. We live for the dead lamb who came back to life. And therefore, we recognize that if we're going to do that, we're going to face persecution. Revelation says that. This means that God's holy people must endure persecution patiently and remain faithful. See, to truly grasp the book of Revelation, Revelation was written to a persecuted people. Revelation many times is misinterpreted when we sit and try to interpret it with all the comforts and luxuries that we have. The book of Revelation is written to people who are following Jesus in the midst of some of the most brutal evil that's going on in the world, and yet they refuse to bow the knee to that evil, and they are continuing to live for the sacrificed lamb. Recognizing all of the persecution, recognizing all of the things that are going to be thrown against them because they refuse to go the way that everyone else is going. That's what this book ultimately is all about, saying, stay true in the persecution. Stay true in the tough times. Stay true to God even when it looks like all hell is broken loose everywhere, because we know that in the end, God wins. This is just the last gasps of the devil. But God wins. Even God's people that in that symbolic way in Revelation, they're under the throne of God saying, how much longer, Lord? How much longer until this is finally accomplished? And God just reminds them and says, a little bit longer. Hold on. Why, God? Why a little bit longer? Why not now? And God, in many ways, is saying, because there are still some to come into the fold. It's like Abraham when he pleaded on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the angels that came and said, we just need to wipe this out. It's gotten so evil. And Abraham was saying, God, if there's just 10 righteous, will you spare the city? In some ways, we pray in this tension of, Lord, come back and end the evil and make it all right. But we also recognize that when that happens, it's all over. And so there's another part of us that says, but yet wait, God. Because if there can be just a few more that can find you in the meantime, if there can be just a few more that can join the family, don't end it yet. We live in that tension. And in the meantime, this means that God's holy people must endure persecution patiently and remain faithful. I don't want to be a sensationist or anything like that, but we all recognize where many of the ideologies of our culture are going. And we'd be naive to not realize that in the next 5, 10, 20 years, there is going to be increasing persecution upon Christians or people that hold to what you would call traditional moral values. And we need to hear this in anticipation. Knowing that, and I love the way this ends, the juxtaposition of violence and peace that's expressed in the victory of the Bible. In Romans 16 it says, the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. It's just so funny. And the God of peace is going to crush the devil. And then he says, may the grace of the Lord Jesus be with you. And it's just like Paul's kind of like, this wonderful God of peace is going to stomp on the devil's head. Now go in peace and go with God. We fight. We're warriors. But we fight through peace and gentleness and love, and even through persecution and enduring. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, sometimes the book of Revelation can almost just give you a headache. And I understand, Lord, so many images, so many pictures, so many things layered on top of one another. But in some ways, Lord, it also shows the depth and the richness of how your story is peeking out, even in the myths and the culture, and definitely throughout the Old Testament story. But Lord, as we piece it all together and we even try to understand it, recognizing that we just barely scratched the surface, we know that ultimately the message is a message of hope, a message of defeat of evil, and the fact that, Lord, even when it feels like evil's not defeated, we are people who don't live by what seems to be right in front of our face. We are people who live in hope. People who put on those glasses that we talked about in the very first sermon of this series, and we can see beyond what's right in front of us and see into the spiritual realm, recognizing that, Lord, you win, evil will be defeated, evil will be destroyed, and love and goodness will reign forever. And we, your people, will be with you. We pray these things in your name. Amen.